This is Power 102 Digital Wednesday. On a Wednesday, Hard Talk is hosted by Fareed Ali. We have special guests in the form of Professor Vanus James, and the topic today, analyzing the 2024-2025 budget. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Good afternoon, Fareed.
Good afternoon, David. It's good to hear your voice.
Hello, David.
How are you
Hello,
doing?
Farid.
Hello, Dr. James. It's always good to see you. Um,
Uh,
we need to book you for a series. Giving you an hour and 45 minutes is never enough. There's so much to talk about, and, and the time passes really quickly. So I'm not going to make any introductory remarks because that will distract us. Um, for the listening public today, we have no other than Dr. Vanus James, and he's going to be sharing his views on the recently concluded 2024-2025 budget for Trinidad and Tobago and its implications for the economy and for the citizens of this country and the corporate sector. Um, Dr. James, I don't want to distract the dialogue into my own conversation piece, but when I examine some of the comments that you shared with us in terms of your oversight view of the documents of the budget and so on. What struck me is your strong views on the fact that there is no room, or there appears to be no room for constitutional reform on the scale that was spoken about when the Prime Minister embarked on this um, discussion in January of 24. Um, is it that you're saying it seems to be that this is just another exercise in futility? Because we had a similar committee, I believe it was 2013, and there was a report that arose out of that. We have another one, 11 years after, and from your comments, when we examine the budget as presented by Mr. Imbert, um, the institutional reform that we expected, or that we expect the PNM to embark upon when they begin their third straight term in office, um, the groundwork for that hasn't been laid. But let me hear from you now. What are your feelings when you look at the budget overall? Do you think, or are you of the view that there are indicators there that we have a clear plan and a clear flight forward in terms of our development and in terms of the goals and objectives that this administration have spoken about in terms of what they'd like to achieve?
well, Farid, there are two parts to your question. As a skilled lawyer, you always ask complex questions. The first part of the question has an answer like, really? Well, the government has not provided any money in this budget for giving effect to any constitutional reform plans. And as you would know, if you're reforming the constitution, there will be a whole lot of things you have to make provisions for. Having read Farrell's report, the Constitution Committee report, they want to enlarge the parliament, say to 59 members in the lower house and somewhere near 55 or something like that. 45 and 40 and 15, I think, yeah, 55 in the Senate. We have a Senate of 31 now, and we have a House of 41. So if you're expanding on that scale, you're going to have provisions in the budget to deal with it. And you have to say, well, under what component of the budget you're making provisions for that kind of reform. Plus, if you want to do oversight in the way that report points to. Oversight is an expensive process, as you know. You have committees in the parliament doing investigations, probing allegations of wrongdoing, and all of these kinds of things. That will require funding. If you're making provisions for the judiciary to be relatively more independent, manage its own budgets, and all these kinds of things, these have to be provided for in the constitution, in the act, in the budget. None of that has been provided for. And so that tells me the government is not serious about constitutional reform, because you can't do constitutional reform on empty pocket. That's the first part of your question. But the second part has a straightforward answer. No. The government has not budgeted in this, neither has it budgeted in any other the previous budgets, as far as I'm concerned, for diversity and development of the economy. Because if it did, in every one of the budgets, you would see a statement of the rate of growth that the country has to achieve in order to achieve Vision 2030, which was brought out, remember, in 2016. So every year after that, you have to track the rate of growth against the rate of growth required to achieve the target for 2030. And we know what that target is. The Vision 2030 document is very clear. And that is that we're trying to achieve developed country status by 2030 here. Back then, you would have needed growth rates somewhere in the region of 7, 8, 9% to achieve it. But now, in 2026, you need a growth rate. In 2024, you need a growth rate somewhere near 20% per year. The budget makes no reference to that, precisely because it seems as though the government has no capacity to face the country and say, we are budgeting here to achieve something other than what was envisaged for Vision 2030. So I think this is substantively, summarily, budgeting for failure, not budgeting for success. Failure to achieve Vision 2030 goal, failure to achieve constitutional reform. The same is true with respect to provisions for Tobago, and pronouncedly and profoundly so for the way crime is treated. Because if you're not going to do constitutional reform, you can't fix crime.
You're making some very strong statements. Do you think that the man on the street understands? And the answer is, I know what the answer is. The man on the street, does the man on the street really understand what you're saying there? When technical persons like yourself speak, the man on the street only cares about what he gets in his hand, eating a bread, and if he get a little money in the pocket. The man on the street doesn't care about development down the road. Technical persons like yourself would appreciate when you're developing a country and you're developing its citizens and you're building an economy, there are certain things that needs to be done in order to achieve on a macroeconomic level and a microeconomic level things, development and create trends, development trends. The man on the street couldn't care less. The voting public, however their bias lies, on whatever side of the divide, all they're concerned about from time to time is what I could get out of it, what you could do for me. And this is when technical persons like yourself speak, they tell themselves, all is just against the government and you all are haters. I am not trying to distract you in saying that. I'm just saying that this is the language. When you speak with people on the ground, that is the responses you get. If we would open up the lines and we call in, they're going to abuse you and me.
Well, Fareed, I am a man on the street in Tobago. Mm-hmm. And first of all, as one of the men in the street, I think of the things the way I laid them out for you in my note to you, first of all. But secondly, the morning after the budget, I went to buy a piece of equipment in a store in Scarborough. And one of those famous men in the street you're talking to stopped me in the store in front of everybody. Doc, what do you think about this budget? Did it have anything in it for me? Weight carrying Tobago, and so on. So to say that the man in the street, I'm not sure which of them you would have talked to, but every one of them that I talked to. And they call me and so on, and they invite me to come to sit down with them for lunch. All the ones I talked to concerned that this budget disrespects the people of the country and disrespects Tobago profoundly so. So the men that I talk to and women
Yeah.
in the street that I talk to are much more conscious than the ones that maybe you meet.
And I accept that. I accept that. Um, my experience with sensible Tobago people, as I say, not that they are not sensible ones, but I'm saying sensible. Clearly, you're speaking the sensible, articulate people who understand that a lot of what government do sometimes is set us up with and sell us hopes and dreams, but in reality, they don't entool us or retool us in a way that we could see for ourselves. And Tobago has, when I look at some of the comments you made, Fali Augustine has his head in the sand in some areas in terms of he's of the view that Tobago is the economy is growing and things are evolving and we are seeing changes. And he's buying into the rhetoric that Imbert is saying that COVID derailed some of the development that's taking place in Tobago. What is your view? If it is we don't have the constitutional reform and we don't have institutional reform that is a byproduct of the constitutional reform, clearly from what you just said, the rate of growth required to achieve Vision 2030 has to be revisited every year to determine whether we on course, and if it is we fallen short, if the rate of growth that we are supposed to be having on a year-to-year basis and the objectives that we set to achieve in, let's say, 2020, 21, 22 has not been achieved, then barring a growth spurt of some kind, at this rate, from what you just said, we may have to get a rate of growth of 20% at some point in order to make up the slack. Where do you see us going? Meaning, as a twin island state, Trinidad and Tobago, if it is we don't have that, if we're not in a position to achieve what we set about to in terms of Vision 2030, because a lot of money is being spent. And people are being fooled like that. You have an airport in Tobago that 755 million, I think, was one of the quotes. The last one I heard was 814 million. That's when people hear that and they see the development taking place, they interpret an airport with success and an airport with development on a level that the government working.
Well, Fareed, let's deal. The scientists deal with evidence and facts, and both the statement by anything you ascribe to a belief by Farley or the answer to this last question can be tested against the evidence. Now, the normal way you budget, having identified a growth rate required to achieve developed country status by 2030. That means, of course, substantively, you're trying to get Trinidad and Tobago to be somewhere near $50,000 per person per year. We're now somewhere near 18,000, somewhere in that zone. So we're far behind. What you normally would do every year when you do the budget is you will say, well, this is the growth rate we had planned for last year. This is the growth rate we achieved during the year. So we're behind. And therefore, we have to recalibrate and spend a little more this year to catch up. Say, or if you're ahead of the curve, you could hold back and say, okay, we don't have to go flat out this year because we are well in line to achieve our goal. Now, based on my reading of the budget this year, what the appropriations bill, as we talk about it from your legal language standpoint, what Imbert provided for is a budget to get us at best to 1.9% growth, because he didn't reference the Vision 20 targets in any way. He reported that in 2023, we had a 1.3% growth. We had a 1.5% growth in 2022, and we are projecting to get a 1.9% growth in 2024. And he has said nothing about how these relate to what growth is required to achieve Vision 2030. So they might have abandoned that for all you and I know. But what you could see here is that these minuscule growth rates don't match up to what is needed to move an economy from 17, 18, 19,000 US dollars in real terms per year to 50,000. And there are other indicators you have to care about as well that he didn't pay attention to, but let's just stick with that. So if this is what you're doing when you're budgeting, you really are budgeting for the failure of the economy to achieve the Vision 2030 target. And I think everybody in the country should care about that. I mean, the government in 2016 offered us this goal. And in 2024, the last year of the term for budgeting purposes that they have here, they are telling us we're doing well with a 1.9% growth rate projected for the year, when what we ought to have been doing is somewhere near 7, 8, 9, 10, and now from the evidence we have, somewhere near 20%. So what kind of government is that other than a government that is deliberately trying to deceive the citizen into thinking we're doing well? This evidence is evidence we're not doing well. Now, as it relates to the evidence on Tobago, let me remind you and the people that are in your audience that on the Tobago story, somebody selling Imbert a bill of goods, because in Tobago in 2022, the economy fell by 2.2%. We moved our GDP under Farley the first year when I started talking about it, from $1.68 billion to $1.65 billion by his own office's accounting. The next year, right, in this last round of budgeting submissions, he reported for 2023 a growth of 1%, but that 1% still leaves you 1.1% behind where he took over. So over the 2 years of his, and something years now of his reign, Tobago's economy has declined collect overall by 1.1%. That is the way you are honest and you level with the people of Tobago, not to tell us because you catch up from 1.65 to 1.66 that you're making progress. You're still in a deep hole. You still have an economy that is in deep trouble in Tobago. Why are you hiding that? Neither Farley nor Imbert is talking seriously to the people of Tobago. I want to put that into the record for you as evidence that we have.
When we look at those figures, in Tobago, you're saying that there's a general decline in the economy in Tobago.
Definitely.
And a decline would mean that there is streams of unemployment. There would be both seasonal and unemployment and otherwise.
Well, not in Tobago, you know, Fareed, because in Tobago, when people are unemployed, what do? They pack their bags and come to Trinidad. So the unemployment data in Tobago do spike. There is no rise in unemployment rate in Tobago because people leave and come to Trinidad as an initial outlet, and then they go abroad if necessary from there. So it doesn't show up in the unemployment figures. For all the years I have studied the Tobago economy, the unemployment rate in Tobago is under 2%, 2% or less. And this is for years and years, ever since 1997 when I came back home to help Ochoa Charles.
All right. So whatever the unemployment rates, that not being a proper indicator as to the true spike, because persons would come to Trinidad and therefore it wouldn't reflect in the figures.
That's right.
Surely it would reflect in the injections of capital within the economy, the internal economy in Tobago.
It should be reflected in the way you budget to deal with the slump, right? And it should be reflected in the way you make your case to the central government about what we have to be trying to do in Tobago on behalf of the nation. None of that is reflected in anything that Farley has submitted. I studied them all.
What would you like to see Fali and this current THA do in Tobago to properly represent to the people of Tobago that this is our development plan, the THA's development plan to develop Tobago's economy? Because from what we've been seeing, and you indicated that the Tobago's output fell by 2% to 1.65 billion, mainly, and you assigned a trigger to that, mainly because Fali's war on the construction sector. Do you care to explain that? You're saying that Fali's action in itself is a direct spur to the economy contracting in Tobago?
Absolutely. I'm saying more than that. I'm saying don't forget that in 2021, after COVID, the Tobago economy grew by 4.3% under the PNM, and we kicked out the PNM at the end of that year because the overall decline from 2012 was so evident in the lives of the people of Tobago, right? That went down to 1.61 billion. Under Fali, after it recovered in 2021 to 1.68 billion, a 4.3% growth, Fali came into office and declared war on the construction sector. He called them, you would remember, he called them corrupt and all sorts of things, and pull this kind of contracting and stop engaging with them. It was a veritable war in Tobago over the construction sector. But remember, a lot of people would have had to be laid off and what have you as a consequence of it. But the effect of that, when you destroy consumption capital, when you destroy the construction sector, which is a part of your capital production sector, what you're doing is you're digging a major hole out of your investment part of your development program. And so what he did led to a sharp 2% decline. He didn't report it. I was the one who reported it. And then having recognized in the media the consequences of my reporting, and they say, well, I report on it because I don't like them and all of that sort of nonsense. The next year when he budgeted, he then provided data, the budget that went down to him for this round of financing. He then provided data that in 2023, the economy was at 1.66. Now, if you compare the 1.66 billion to 1.68, which he took over, that's 1.1% below where he took it over. So he still has a slump to deal with, and it's just slick talk to tell us that you've gone from 1.65 to 1.66. When you're not pointing us to the fact that you started with a 1.68, so you're in a big hole still. Now, it's not fools you're talking to. So when I go into the media in Tobago and I tell people this, they, oh man, and so on, and they get the message. Now, as it relates to where Tobago has to go, back in 2022, Fali told the parliament explicitly, he's going to let us get a development plan done. And the answer to your question is, that's exactly what still has to be done. It still has not yet been done because it requires the whole population to participate in a proper development planning exercise, which I told Fali. I'm a planner by training. And I said, look, if you want to do this way, in a proper way to help the people of Tobago, we have to find a way to set up the government to get everybody into the process. And if you're not prepared to do that, well, then you can't get any serious plan. And he said, well, he'd prefer to go the way Manning did, which is to go down the road of town hall meetings and all that sort of stuff. So the end result of all of that, of course, is since you can't do any development planning by holding town hall meetings, we end up in 2024 now with no development plan. And you can't make any headway going forward without doing at least the equivalent of Vision 2030 for the country. You have to do Tobago's equivalent of that and set up the view of where we're taking Tobago. And then every year you send for the budgeting provisions, you send in relation to that plan. Now, let me make one last point to you. If you are running as an economy like Tobago, transfers from Port of Spain cannot lead to development. Impossible. And in any case, under Imbert, he made it more difficult because he cut the development budget of Tobago from 300 million in 2022 down to 205 million now for the coming term. And if that is what is happening, $50 million cut every year, it means you do not have transfers sufficient from the central government to carry a development program. So what do you have to do? You have to come up with alternative financing mechanisms. These are available to Tobago under the THA Act today. And Fali has done nothing about them because I think the real reason is he doesn't know how to guide the public servants to deliver the kinds of financing solutions Tobago needs. And you can't deliver them properly with the government organized as it is anyhow.
Have you given thought to the fact that Fali's economic advisors, those people around him, maybe people who don't understand or they don't have the know-how to properly advise the chief sec? Because we keep assigning a characterization of Fali Augustine or assigning a value to him. Fali's technical expertise came from a teaching background. I'm not in any way trying to demean his training. I'm just saying that there are certain economic imperatives that you expect of this chief sec that he may be devoid of. He doesn't have the understanding of that. Now, one way to deal with that is naturally, Patrick Mann is the one who said that to be in parliament, all you need is a level head on your shoulder. I'm sure his head is level.
Well, if that is the standard that the country has to work with, we're in big trouble, are we not? I mean, if you look at Westminster, when Liz Truss took power after Boris Johnson and proved within a couple of months that she didn't know how to run the country and run the economy in particular, what did the British Parliament do? Kick her out of office and put in Rishi Sunak. Any demonstration of incompetence of that kind should trigger a reaction by the public of the kind you are describing, that he doesn't know he's young and so on. When we were campaigning for office, Fali didn't say I might be a little bit rusty, I might be too young, I mightn't be an economist, and so on, so I'm really not fit for the job. That's not what we told the people at Tobago. The requirement for chief secretary is to have the capacity to manage all the divisions. In other words, you have to be able to guide all the secretaries in their respective portfolios. You don't just have to be an economist, you have to be a secretary of everything if you want to be chief secretary, because you have to coordinate all of them. So that's not what he told the people at Tobago, that he didn't have the equipment to lead the technical team that he has. And let me just also make the point to you that you don't evaluate Cominbert on that basis in Trinidad. He's the Minister of Finance. Fali in Tobago is the Secretary of Finance. When Cominbert brings forward a budget in Trinidad, you take him to task as the leader of the financing function across all the ministries and so on. His ability to engage all of them, to say to them, this is where we're going with the budget call and so on. You respond, you treat with all of that, and you say, okay, this is as far as we could go. The Ministry of Planning and Development will give you a hand in working out where the country should go. In Tobago's case, all of that is under Fali. Planning and Development is under Fali, Finance is under Fali. Well, okay, if you take the portfolio and you think you have troubles and challenges, why don't you set up the government in a way that allows you to get access to all the information? Because this is not about your economists in the Division of Finance. This is about whether you can get the relevant information from the people of Tobago to tell you how to budget. If you are not sure about your own personal skills, you've got to get it from the rest of us. He has made no effort to do that. And you would admit that Cominbert doesn't make any effort to get it done. So for the country as a whole, we're in big trouble. And for Tobago, we're in big trouble because we're budgeting the wrong way and we're governing the wrong way, which is the underlying reason we have to budget the wrong way.
Central government may very well wish to have Fali Augustine and the THA as it currently subsists in the hole that they have it in, purely because they know in a year's time there's going to be a reality in Tobago that has to be revisited, and the Tobagonians would have to make a decision on its position. If it is central government, in other words, central government, let us say, and forgive me for making a remark like this, let us say central government is setting Tobago up for failure, purely on the basis of when we will have that THA election in 2025, then when the PNM gets their people in there, then central government will release in the mid-year budget more money. They may be release more funding for certain things. When they have their people there to pilot certain things there, then they would be more amenable to making some structural changes within Tobago. In other words, give Fali and them enough rope to hang themselves. Fali is not a charismatic leader where even when he doesn't have the capacity to baffle us with any sort of language, and we see where we're heading. Now, I'm not distracting you. You went on to make a point on the issue of crime. We've had our 25th murder in Tobago. Last year, I believe the total was 16. So we're in about mid-year this year. Well, not mid-year. We in the month of November practically. So with 2 more months left, let's say we have about 13 murders in Tobago, right? I mean, given the trend, that doesn't sell well with the boats that come in, the cruise ships that come into Tobago. That doesn't sell well. This new airport that you're building, yes, it'll be completed in 2025. What attractiveness and what attraction is lies within Tobago, barring what we know already is there, meaning that there's no development to say you're building. The last piece of development was that harbor there in Buku, the boardwalk. The fishermen under Curtis Douglas have been agitating for monies that they never got since the oil spill, damage to their boats, damage to equipment. They've been back and forth with the THA with regard to that. They've been threatening legal action. That sort of climate within Tobago doesn't speak well of a certain level of togetherness. I'm not saying that they should, the fishermen of the sea and the fisher folk in Tobago should align themselves with Fali and toe the line until funds get their way. But there's a general picture that the interpersonal relationships between the THA and certain stakeholders in Tobago isn't a healthy, wholesome one.
Well, let me pick you up on the two parts of your usual complex question. On the first part, let me point out that the PNM was in power in Tobago from 2015 to 2021, and they didn't provide the THA with any of the budgetary requirements, nor did they facilitate the THA to take any of the steps needed to delink the Tobago budget from the central government's budget and prosecute a proper development agenda with independent financing arrangements. The PNM did none of that. So when you put them back in power, if you do, which I doubt it in Tobago's case, you will find that they will go on with that practice. And remember, as I just started in a conversation, that's the same practice they have for Trinidad. So they're not budgeting better for Trinidad than they're budgeting for Tobago, actually. They're making the same mistakes in Trinidad that they're making in Tobago. So I think if the people of Trinidad and Tobago wanted evidence that the PNM is not good for Tobago and not good for Trinidad, this budget provides it, in my view. This budget provides ample evidence that they're budgeting for failure. They're not budgeting for the success of the country. And I think the reason for it is they don't know how. So that's the first half of your question. Now, regarding the matter of crime. The crime that you're seeing emerging in Tobago it's substantively delinked from the interpersonal relationships in Tobago, even that between the THA and institutions in Tobago. The crime that you're seeing here is the opportunistic crime that is linked to what's going on in Trinidad, the destructive crime rate you have out of control in Trinidad. And there's a transfer element of that. And there's an encouragement by the way we have organized ourselves in Tobago to people who might be inclined towards crime to test it out. And that's where this whole idea of the gang stuff is coming from. You can't keep an economy in the doldrums for 140 years, have crimes out of control in Trinidad, and don't expect a spillover element And also, as I've told you before on your show, if your provisions for crime is a policing provision, you're dead in the water from the start. You're not going to get that solution that way. To get crime in Tobago under control, you have to do a lot more than what the central government is doing. And remember, it's the central government that controls policing in Tobago. We don't have any mechanisms under the law to put our own policing arrangements in place, secure our communities and so on. And our communities are left exposed because the communities are not empowered to take the steps required to prevent the surge of crime and to address it in terms of remedial action. So we're left in a constitutional conundrum as part of the country in which we are not empowered to take steps to protect ourselves, and we're not allowed to organize ourselves and our economy by the constitutional arrangements that you have in the country today, and by the fact that Farley and his team doesn't have the skill to set up Tobago. Tobago could be set up tomorrow morning to deal with this issue of crime. You just have to think about empowering the communities properly. And if you empower the communities properly to look after themselves, and you don't need to wait on the constitutional reform to do that. You could have done it since 1980, for that matter, and especially since 1996 under the current law, which allows them to take whatever steps they want. You could do it tomorrow morning, but you have to have the knowledge and the skills, and in a kind of sense, the respect for the people in their communities and the potential they have there, in order to deal with these issues, to deal with education responses to deviance when you see it, to deal with health responses, to deal with social networking responses, and all of the things that communities are good at, but we are disempowering them to do. So there's nothing in this that is really about the relationship between Farley and Tobagonians or Topalian institutions in Tobago. This is about a poor design, both in Tobago and in Trinidad. You would not have the spiraling crime out of control in Trinidad if you organize Trinidad properly either. But when you have a chief secretary in place who doesn't have the understanding or the courage to set up Tobago for success, you then have this result that it's easy for crime to spill over from Trinidad and for attractive opportunities to be offered to Tobagonians. And then you look and you scratch the surface and you discover that's where the bulk, where almost all of these killings to 24, 25, that's where it comes from. It's all tied to that spillover of guns and drugs and what have you. So this is something the country could fix very quickly, actually. If Rowley takes seriously constitutional reform, he'll know this is one of the reasons you have to do it. You have to do it properly, because without it, you cannot deal with crime in Trinidad. And unless you organize yourselves properly in Trinidad and deal with all of these things, we in Tobago will be locked in, not because we want to follow you, but because we are in one national environment. We can't lock the borders and stop Trinidadians from coming over. We can't stop Tobagonians from moving and so on. So in that context, it's good governance for the whole country that provides room and option for Tobago to make progress, and to make progress on crime too.
There's a clear umbilical cord that we share between Trinidad and Tobago. Mm-hmm. And so whatever he feeds the Twin Islands state, it moves back and forth. There's an interconnectivity that exists. And Tobago, being the less dominant partner, they naturally they feel the weight heavier. Their ability to digest what is happening is a challenge more so than us in Trinidad.
Big time. That's correct. And may I just add a little point there, not to cut your trend of thought. The evidence is what you have to rely on here. When the umbilical cord is there only through the budget, fundamentally. There are other elements, but this is the main story. And since the budget is not adequate to finance development in Tobago, what you have had from 1962 to today is that the economy of Trinidad, with the injection of oil and other related revenues, has grown by leaps and bounds from $4,900 per person in 1962 to 19,000 today. In that same period, the Tobago economy has remained stagnant, including in the last couple of years when Cominbert is reporting 1.5, 1.3, 1.9% growth. You have stagnation in Tobago. So Tobago's GDP per capita today is about $3,900, below where we were in 1962. So while the country has made progress, Tobago has gone nowhere. And the reason Tobago has gone nowhere is that the constitutional arrangements under which the country is organized is a millstone around the necks of the nation, but especially of a place like Tobago, which has to take creative steps. And you know what that means? You have to then challenge the people in Trinidad. You have to do the public education. You have to buck the system as Tobago, which is what Robinson did, and opened the door to the internal self-government. So we made some progress there. Now we need to use the provisions under the THA Act to show the country where we ought to go. And I have to admit, I helped to put these fellas in power. And I'm completely surprised that they turned their backs on what we campaigned and told the people of Tobago we would do. So that setup is still not in place, and we're going to have to revisit that next election.
The Foreign Direct Investment Act, there's been a huge amount of criticism by some technical persons. I will go so far to say the former Minister of Health has thrown his voice into the foray. Now he's no longer in Parliament, and he's no longer actively involved in his side of the divide of the politics. So some of it could be seen by some persons as him just being sour. But you being somebody technical, do you see any? Do you share a view that the Foreign Direct Investment Act in itself doesn't open itself up to encouraging investment within Trinidad and Tobago on the level where foreigners feel at home in investing here? He mentioned that the situation of the crime is a deterrent, and he's also mentioning that access to U.S. currency and some of the hurdles that have been put in place for the corporate sector from abroad to set up here really frustrates, and people, these investors prefer to go Antigua and Barbuda and the St. Kitts and the other islands where it's less cumbersome. I think that would. Is there any merit in what he's saying that the legislation itself needs to be revisited? Because I know that under A.N.R. Robinson, he had made some inroads in terms of that act, and including the Land Holdings Act in Tobago, where foreigners were allowed to purchase. But then we have a different kind of problem in Tobago, the problem of whether the ownership of the lands and whether lands could be sold and whether you can get freehold land in Tobago. What is your view on that generally in terms of, do you see that legislation as being poisonous?
Yeah, I think the Foreign Investment Act that we're working with now is an anachronism. It's tied to the constitutional design of the country, to allow the Minister of Finance a lot of leverage in handling requests for investment. So that's one half of the problem, and that includes the case of Tobago, where we have the land holdings provisions that limit the availability of property under our terms for to be used to attract people to come to Tobago. But that's a tiny part of the conversation, because you're not getting foreign investment to come into Trinidad outside of the energy sector. In Trinidad and Tobago, the bulk of the foreign investment comes into the energy sector, and that's the end of that. If you're really running a serious economy, then foreign investment will be attracted into a multiplicity of sectors, many other sectors. Your capital producing industries, education, healthcare, and others, even the creative industries, would finance and other things like that, financial services as in Cayman and Bermuda and those places. Those would all attract foreign capital inflows. But to do it, you need a view and an understanding of the strategy that deals with the crime-related problem too, and that is that for Trinidad and Tobago, for any of the Caribbean islands, and let me remind you, it's not much different in the rest of the Caribbean, notwithstanding what your economist is saying about Antigua, Barbuda, and so on. They are not making much progress either. But the substantive point that I want to make is that for Trinidad and Tobago and for any other country, the doorway to attracting foreign capital inflows outside of the energy sector is through the creation of safe, healthy zones that could attract family-friendly environments, that could attract foreign capitalists who are engaging in startups. You have to put forward some sort of entrepreneurial attraction drive to bring them in, to find themselves in a healthy, safe environment, and that would be in the communities that would have to be taking steps to deliver those. And then in an environment where real dialogue would allow for the supporting policies that would keep them trying, help them to stay afloat and bring their startups and other such ventures to fruition. That kind of entrepreneurial development program is completely missing, and you're trying to do it through the industrial parks. But if you look at the way the industrial parks, this has been a story ever since the country has started, since independence. We've never been able to use these industrial parks, and we have not been able to do it now, to transform and diversify the economy, because that's not where the thrust of diversification is. We didn't get a creative industry in music and all the things when I come on your show, these nice songs you're playing. We didn't get that from industrial parks. We got that from the communities. And if you keep suppressing their ability to undertake entrepreneurship and to encourage entrepreneurs that operate from their space, giving them the power to drive entrepreneurial safe zones and all these other things, rather than export processing zones and all of that sort of stuff. If you don't empower them to take the lead in entrepreneurial development through safe communities, safe zones, healthy zones, with programs that are like blue zone, that create blue zones like in Loma Linda in California and so on. If you're not doing that, you're not going to attract the flood of entrepreneurs from abroad that you need to be talking seriously about foreign direct investment. In St. Kitts and Nevis, and I think some of it is in Dominica, they get around to the business of selling passports, the citizen by investment type initiative. But that's a drop in the bucket of what we have to do. We have to look more at what Malta is doing to attract foreign investors. You have to make these communities hotbeds of collaboration, hotbeds of remedial action for education, hotbeds of crime prevention, not crime control, crime prevention, hotbeds of support for entrepreneurship, flexible support that allows the use of things like AI and other kinds of tools to drive information sharing and to provide validation of investment at the community level that people could take to the bank. You have communities that are empowered. Entrepreneurs who choose to go to those communities could be supported and facilitated to go local or go foreign with their endorsements, driven by the knowledge that we are creating the kinds of financial tools and the kind of education systems and so on based in the communities to allow them to flourish. But when you're trying to do it the way we have been trying, what you'll get is what we have been getting, which is that when the industry like oil and gas could make huge profits for the foreigners, that's where they go. And you're not doing anything to create industries that can make great profits because of the things you are doing, not because Jehovah or Allah gave you some oil in the ground. That's what our failure is. Our failure is to build the community-based economy. That's what Lloyd Bess used to call the residential sector, the onshore sector. This is what gave us our language. This is what gave us our music. This is what gave us the cultural style that we have that makes you what people around the world will call a trini, and so on. All of these things came from the communities. None of them came from something you call sugar or oil. They came from palmies and Lavantil, and that's where they came from, the communities. And if you don't strengthen them to take steps to do community development in a proper way, to anchor the transformation of the economy, you'll never see the day when foreign investment will go into anything other than what natural resources encourage. And Jamaica is experiencing that same situation with tourism. All the foreign investment is coming into tourism and not anywhere else in the economy. Why is that? Because we're not inventing the kind of economy that our people would naturally invent if they are empowered to do so. What we do is we use the central government to burden our communities and our local government bodies with restrictions and barriers. And if you don't remove the central government from around their necks, we cannot do the things you're asking for with respect to foreign capital inflows. And that's what the economist has to understand. Antigua is not doing any better than Trinidad and Tobago in that regard. In fact, they may well be doing worse.
When the Prime Minister, on the declaration of his victory in 2020, in August 2020, he did, his first few words were that the next 2 years going to be tough. That was his language. And then with recent times, he's been saying that we require to hold some strain until 2027. And Stuart Young has been speaking volumes, talking about despite all that has been said about Maduro and Venezuela, that Trinidad and Tobago have kept a very healthy relationship with Maduro, and they're developing the dragon gas, that there is untapped money in terms of the potential for revenues in the gas industry and the Venezuelan streams of gas out there. That if it is we were to go into partnership with the Venezuelans, we're able to channel some of that dragon gas there into our LNG plants. We'll be able to make money using Venezuelan resources, natural resources, and it will augur well for both economies, Venezuela and Trinidad. And it seems to be saying that we need to guide the economy away from oil, away from the hydrocarbon, because that's not where the world is going. And it seems that this government is preoccupied with delivering on that initiative and telling itself that we're going to generate streams of income that is going to augur well for the national economy. In other words, to put real money in our pockets. So when we talk about community-based economies and developing that is small money, and maybe I'm just saying.
Not small money. It's not small money. It's not small money in Bermuda and in Antigua. It's not small money in France and in Britain. All of those are economies that are community driven. If you go to Cayman Islands, right, it's the hotel plan that you will experience is not Marriott and Ritz-Carlton the way Rowley thinks. It's 10 and 20 rooms, small facilities in the communities where the entrepreneurs can come, spend 6 months, do their deals, their financial deals, bring colleagues to spend in affordable spaces. 20% of the room stock of the Cayman Islands is them big time Ritz-Carlton and Hilton and them. 80% of the room stock is 10 room and 20 room A-class facilities. Now, if you think that you only need the kind of big splash to get high quality, highly productive investment, you're wrong. When you do those kinds of investments that transform the foundations of the economy at the community level, the result is what you see in Cayman, 90,000. They don't have any oil, $90,000 per person per year from financial services. But they go around the Caribbean, they go to Jamaica, they go and they hire the best skills and say, come work with us in our communities, and you'll see. So that's the same approach we have to have. You have to. This government is wedded to oil and gas. I don't know what reason it is. Maybe because Rowley is a geologist, but it's wedded to oil and gas. It thinks what you are saying there is going to make any difference. All it will do is rescue the government from the budget deficits that it's running. So by 2027, if they get Dragon and all these other Lorraine and so on stream, you will get another big injection and it will rescue them and the government will be able to spend on waste and so on. But don't fool yourself. Since 1973, we've been doing exactly that. If you look carefully, the economy of Trinidad and Tobago between 1973 and now got billions and billions, hundreds of billions actually, of dollars of foreign exchange from oil and gas. It did nothing to transform our economy. It has not produced a Trinidad and Tobago economy that is performing as well as Bermuda without oil and gas, that is performing as well as Cayman without oil and gas. The reason for it is the type of industry we are focusing on and the lack of vision to spend the oil money to build them. And if you look in this budget, you will see evidence of that. I documented for you in my little note. Comimbert is talking about the transformation of the economy. He doesn't have any parameters to work with. He gives us data that says that the consumption component of the manufacturing sector is outgrowing the capital component of the manufacturing sector. That's the opposite of what you have to have. If you want to build a viable economy in Trinidad and Tobago, educational exports, healthcare exports, creative industry exports, and any other exports of capital services, financial services, professional services, and so on, those are what have to grow faster than exports of food and beverages and so on. Think of it in this simple way, Fareed. I know you're a fantastic lawyer, but you're not an economist. Let me give you a little piece of economics. If you want to build a house next year, you don't go out there and make arrangements to have a set of foul runs and put foul in the foul run over the course of this year. Because next year, when next year comes, what you would need is cement and steel and other things to build your house. So when you want to set up an economy, the capacity building part of the economy is what you have to focus on. You have to focus on building capital capacity, education production, healthcare production. None of those are mentioned in Comimbert's budget. The biggest share of the budget of Trinidad and Tobago goes to education and healthcare. And no talk in the budget about exporting the products of those two big industries. What is the reason for that? Lack of understanding. And the belief in Comimbert's head that the rest of us are, quote, uninformed commentators, unquote. You see that arrogance? It has held the country back for 10 years. And if we keep going with these jokers, it will hold us back for another 10 years, maybe another 1,000 years for that matter. We've got to get rid of this whole system of government that is holding us back and liberate our people to allow them to become entrepreneurs where they live.
When I look at some of your comments, in the year 2022-2023, the allocation for Tobago stood at some 300 million. In 2024-2025, it fell to some 205 million.
Right.
You're pointing out that there has been a trend, not just between last financial year and now, but in previous financial years, that the sums allocated to Tobago has been $50 million and more, or thereabouts, each year.
That's right.
Clearly,
and that's another example of budgeting for failure.
The thing is, when we look at $60 billion being allocated to deal with national security in the last 10 years, your figure that you indicated here is the police got 26 billion of that 60 billion. Mm-hmm. My thing is, the state has money, but they've been allocating the money for different sectors, and where the need has arisen. I think there's a need to satisfy the public that much more is being done to bring the crime rates down to acceptable levels, if there's an acceptable level that we could appreciate. So naturally, something has to give. the budget for Tobago, the development allocation budget for Tobago falling by 15 million each year, it's not necessarily, and it's a question, it's not a statement. Is it necessarily an act by central government designed to frustrate Tobago in some way? Or is it simply that we are reallocating the money and Tobago is going to benefit from the increased expenditure on ministry on national security, and therefore, though you're cutting short the development budget by 50 million, by increasing the budget in national security, Tobago is a benefit is redounding to Tobago's benefit in other spurs in other areas. So it's somewhat unfair, is it? Is it unfair to say that if we judge it purely on the basis that the allocation for development has been decreasing, that central government lacks a vision to develop Tobago at the rate that it should?
The central government is, under our laws, not responsible for economic development in Tobago. And it doesn't matter what the central government does with crime, if its policing approach to crime prevention and crime management is what we have to live with. The evidence in front of you is that it's not going to work in Tobago, so crime is going to increase. And if crime is increasing in Tobago, we cannot develop safe zones in our communities that could be used as platforms for development. Now, if the government is cutting the development budget, so the first part of my answer is there is no evidence that increasing spending in Trinidad generates benefits for Tobago, by and large. There's no evidence of that. There's none in the last 3 years, and there's none in the last 62 years since we've been independent. Tobago has not benefited as an economy from the fact that you have big spending going on in Trinidad on any area, including education and all of those things. Tobago is among the worst of the education systems in the country, whatever is happening in Trinidad. Now, to deal with the effects of cutting the development budget in Tobago, which I think is deliberate, and I think it's misguided as well by the government. The flip side of that is, it doesn't matter if you double the development budget in Tobago and give Farley 500 million or a billion. It will generate no development because you'll still do the wrong thing. First of all, for the country, you cannot know what is the appropriate allocation unless the appropriations bill draft comes out 4 months before the budget. And all of us can participate in discussing it and bringing insights about what we can do, what we want to do, what we're prepared to do, when we need help, how much help, and so on. All of that has to filter into the budget provisions, not just public sector dialogue among themselves, and not just dialogue between the Minister of Finance and the people he could talk to. You need a parliament set up to get everybody into the conversation. We don't have that now. So the budget that Comimbert has put together is the wrong budget. And the same thing is true in Tobago. So long as we're set up the way we are, any amount of money we have in Tobago to spend will deliver no development because they'll budget on the wrong thing every time. And the wrong thing means you're talking about Tobago in terms of roads and bridges and so on. You have to talk about Tobago in terms of where the entrepreneurial capabilities have to be awakened in order to get development going. Development is generated by investment of the right kind, not just investment of the right kind. It's not enough to talk about road and bridge and airport, because you need a place in the society where supply is being created, where the communities, you see the Castara model thing, where the communities are developing a brand of tourism that is so unique that people are prepared to come to Castara and spend 6 months, spend 3 months, not just a weekend going to the beach. And you need that kind of approach to budgeting. It's only possible in the context of a redesign of the governance arrangement that would liberate the communities from the central government. So no matter how much money you hand to Tobago, I don't agree with the cutting of the development budget. That's a bad idea. But even so, the more fundamental thing is that we need to do the constitutional reform thing for the country and At least if I were in Fadi's position, I would do the constitutional reform thing for Tobago without regard to what's going on in Trinidad, without regard to what they say. When you don't do that, all the money you get will be mismanaged and misspent. All the development money for sure. And you wouldn't have the courage to set up the development bank, go after money to deliver your economy from the hands of the central government in Trinidad. Tobago shouldn't be talking about transfers from Trinidad to finance development in Tobago. We have to raise our own resources for that. No, you can't develop an economy like Tobago with transfers from policy. So it doesn't matter how much Commonwealth transfers to Tobago. We have to come up with our own clever financing arrangements for financing in the communities and for financing the big projects we need the THA to undertake to support community development. Communities in Tobago told me community development cannot be delivered by anything that Fali is doing. None. They don't know what they're doing. It's not working for us. That's what the communities all over Tobago told me. If you want to deal with that, you have to set up mechanisms for financing what they want to do. And you have to constitute them as government to be able to take those steps and support the enterprises that are operating in them. Agriculture will not be in the state it is in Tobago if we had community empowered. Fishing wouldn't be in the state. I just supervised a big study for Shell on the fishing industry. Remarkable what these fellows are able to do with their fishing activities. But the communities in which they operate do not have the resources and the power to support them and help them to do the things they are telling us they would like to do to improve their contribution to the economy. And so on and on. The same is true everywhere. The same is true in agriculture, everywhere you look. The communities where Tobago is an island of communities primarily, unlike Trinidad, I suppose, in a little bit. But the communities are locked down by not having the power to deal with their circumstances. They want to encourage their young people. They have no means to do it. They could just complain and talk. Why are we going on with this nonsense? No reason for it. All of it is tied to the habits of intoxicated politics that we practice when you set up an executive cabinet government, an executive government, and allow it to run riot in the country. And it damages Trinidad as well as it damages Tobago.
When I look at some of the comments you made as it relates to crime, you've indicated that your observation is that the government has been concentrating on the policing aspect and developing and financing or channeling resources, harnessing, channeling, and controlling resources in developing the increasing number of police officers that we have. Although it has been said that per capita, we have the highest ratio of police per capita of the Caribbean.
Exactly.
Yet still, what we've been sold, what the public has been spoon-fed, is that we need to bring another 1,200 police officers on stream, promote, increase the rates of promotion to motivate the existing officers. Although I see recently in court, a High Court judge just barred the promotion of certain key officers for different reasons. So we had a fairly vociferous former commissioner of police in Gary Griffith, who keeps running into the public space, maybe because he has political ambitions and we're in that time of the year and season. But he has been saying that when he held the seat of office, that he was promoting for the development of a forensic science center and for making the police somewhat independent of certain institutions of the state. Therefore, they can better manage themselves and by creating greater efficiency within the service. I guess in terms of the Forensic Science Center, right now is currently being fed by the Special Recovery Unit in Kumoto, Trinidad, and then the Forensic Science Center in Federation Park in West Border, Spain. In other words, this particular commissioner fed the community the narrative, or the country the narrative that under-resourced police service that isn't in touch with the technological and approaches to dealing with crime and criminality will continue to lose and will continue to be falling short of its objectives. So it seems that the government or the central government is and as demonstrated in the budget, is concentrating resources in the aesthetics associated with fighting crime, as opposed to dealing with what is happening on the ground. Having said that, Rodell Kirk and Collis Hazel, who were recently transferred out of Tobago, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I believe Kirk is Tobagonian. I'm not too sure about Collis Hazel, but maybe he is too.
Yes, Tobagonian too, yeah.
Right. They were saying that they accept the transfer, as I guess they have no choice but to say same. They accept the transfer, but they're saying that what they were able to do is that they had relationships with the community, particularly in that Argyle area where there's a upspur in criminality. And there seems to be some serious increases in gang-related violence there. So based on the relationships he has on the ground in terms of having grown up in Tobago, he has the trust and confidence of communities. And Ely and Oswin Subero now have the unenviable task of landing in foreign territory for all intents and purposes, and having now to try to achieve what Kirk and Hazel did, build trust, and then then try to address the issue of crime. It means to say, my reading of that is, if Ely and Subero lands in Tobago as they have, and they're right now building trust as you and I are speaking, whatever measure they have to put in place in order to bring these communities under their control, or bring it into the hands of the police, so much so that the police can exercise force or exercise their will and control the crime spurs. It's a forward projection. Right now in Trinidad, we have the Minister of National Security saying that they hope to bring crime under control by Christmas. So these are the cliches that we have to live with. We already set ourselves, they gave themselves some breathing space, right? We will bring crime under control. We set a short-term goal of Christmas. I'm afraid for Ely and Subero. They have walked into a hotbed in Tobago now. And they're going to be losing ground with the transfer of Kirk and Hazel. If you read between the lines and the language of Hazel, and they have to get a honeymoon period in order to settle. The window dressing is, there's a view, and we have to be careful what we wish for, right? There's a view that in Tobago, things were out of control, despite the fact that Hazel and Kirk were there. And by removing them, it may look good on the surface that, we took a proactive step and we brought in people now who might be expected to deliver. But when Subero and Ely don't bring things under control, let us say by Christmas or Carnival, there might be a voice that they send two fellas here who don't know the airs from the toe. I'm saying that, and this is where I'd like you to comment. What is your view? I mean, yes, central government is stockpiling. They have certain, it's window dressing. A lot of it is in terms of establishing a national forensic DNA data bank. They're dealing with expansion and rehabilitation programs. If we look at it from the judicial aspect, a lot of it is they're pushing the plea bargaining process, maximum sentence indication, things to just unplug the leaks and try to get things under control in terms of the flow out, in terms of the justice system, in terms of the spillovers we're having, to at least bring the plumbing under order there. But it's all window dressing, it appears. The policing aspect, the judicial aspect, it's all seems to be window dressing. We don't have any criminal justice system that is actually effectively dealing with the imperatives that face us. It seems like it's damage control. What is your view in terms of what do we do now? I think we're looking at Imbert and his budget, but the budget is just a financial indication of where they intend to go. But if it is we don't have the institutional machinery to absorb and reallocate these resources in particular areas and to spend wisely and to have strong institutions that could manage this money and actually give you the results we have, then we might be looking at a mid-year budget where you're asking for more money, and the problem may not be money.
Well, I think, Farid, this whole conversation about crime brings you to the fundamentals. What the government is really trying to do is to address crime by policing. There is no evidence that the country has. For example, even under the years of Randy Burrows and those people, you have no evidence that more policing will bring crime under control. The way you bring crime under control is first and foremost to understand its fundamental causes. This budget contains no ideas and no money about how the country will investigate the causes of crime. Rowley makes arguments from time to time about poor parenting and so on, but that is all guesswork. You want to be serious about dealing with crime, you've got to study crime the way you study poverty, for example. You have to go do the work, look at your communities, look at the community ecosystems. In each community, there will be enabling factors. You have to set up a community-based ecosystem index that tells you where the enabling factors are worse and where they are best and stuff like that. And you've got to understand from the overall point of view what causes crime. But when you discover the causes, you're likely to discover that prevention of crime is the real approach you have to have, solving the problem of spiraling crime. Now, it doesn't mean that you don't need decent, high-skilled policing. And to that end, the country needs to think seriously about building capacity to equip our police officers with the knowledge and skills to understand what they are seeing on the ground. As far as I'm aware, the country has a very mediocre mechanism training program for police officers. I've mentioned to you on your show before that when I was a professor in City University, I used to teach police officers in the master's degree program in criminal justice in New York City at John Jay College. The country has to think through properly how we're going to educate our police officers to tackle crime. And the data that we have in the country is that we have somewhere near 12 to 15 million, and maybe it's going 1,000, and it's going up now with the rising unemployment rate, of persons who are pretty well educated and can get involved in undesirable activities if they can't find serious options, more attractive options than criminal activity. So we have a setting in which the problem will only get worse if we do not look at the fundamental causes, and you will not find those without finding out that the prevention programs that are underlying crime prevention will have to take place in the communities. You have to have them in an empowered Lavantil, in an empowered Mova, in an empowered Chaguanas, and so on. You have to provide mechanisms by which communities, when they see the problems emerging, intervene to steer children in a different direction. That has to be done through networks in communities. That can't be done by police. It cannot even be done by police youth clubs. It has to be done where people see the problem from day to day and have the power in their hands to take steps to redirect children, to educate children properly. One of the major problems you're dealing with that ties to criminality in Trinidad is the defunct education system we're running. We're running an education system that produces less than 30% successful graduates in terms of people with maths and English, 5 subjects and so on, every year, right? Poor performance purely on academics. Why is that? Because we ignore the skill-intensive part of education. If you really want to bring crime under control, you have to have a proper skill-intensive component from preschool all the way through to university, where people are learning to do things. I went to UWI like all the rest of us, and one of the things you discover after passing through the institution, a wonderful institution, and you go abroad, is that you learn how to think about things. but the skill to do things is the deficient part of the system that I experienced growing up. And I've seen some of the best people who went off into semi illegitimate activity were the most intelligent people that I encountered throughout my youth growing up. And the system had no way to educate them properly because they were not interested in quote unquote academics. So if you don't sort through all of these fundamentals, you're not going to get the problem solved. And you can't sort them through at the level of the Ministry of Education. You have to sort them through at the level of the community where people could see the problem and tell you, well, it's this skill that matters, that skill that matters. I'm going to use a portion of my community budget to tackle this problem with this set of children, this set of families, and so on. That's where crime prevention, surrogate parenting, only work at a community level where people trust one another, engage with one another, network with one another, dialogue with one another, reveal their problems to each other. And they will be able to say, well, this is where we have to turn. If you don't set that kind of foundation up, you're trying to solve the problem the wrong way. And we have a lot of evidence, Fareed, that it won't work. More policing. You look, Jamaica is a great example of it. More policing didn't work in Jamaica. What the government did there with these programs was to head into the communities with the army and the police and a whole battery of capabilities, policing capabilities. And they brought down crime within a day or two in any community they entered into. But as soon as they turned their back, the problem come back. And the significant lesson you learn from that is that you need continuous, inclusive monitoring and reaction and baseline prevention solutions forever in the communities. That cannot be delivered by police. It has to be delivered by the communities themselves, setting up their own crime prevention arrangements and their prevention of their response to crime in collaboration, of course, with the powers of higher order, more powerful policing and so on. But the real solution lies at the community level, in every community in the country. Now, I always ask you on your show, what would Laventil do with crime if it had the resources to develop PAN into the best PAN university in the world and all that sort of stuff, rather than having to get Despas to run out of Laventil and go downtown in Port Spain? They would have created a mecca of music out of the Laventil environment. But they didn't have the empowerment to do it. They didn't have the money to finance it. And as a consequence of that lack of empowerment, also, they didn't have the resources to tackle crime properly. It's that lack of empowerment, which we raised in the country back in 1970. We told the country the answer to all these problems is give power to the people. And that could only be done by giving power to them through their communities. You're wasting time if you go down the road of more policing. More policing not going to take no solution.
Lloyd Best used to say that we're treating the symptoms.
That's right.
And we're not treating the cause.
Correct.
I think that is in keeping with your point that no provision for the study of the causes of crime is being made. So clearly, if the police comes with their high-powered rifles and the power of the law behind them, they would be able to control the size of the flames that engulf the community.
For
but
now,
they haven't dealt with what triggered the fire in the first place.
That's right. That's the thing. So I'm agreeing with all your comments, but I think we have to go to the fundamentals. We have to go, look, and underneath these fundamentals lies a critical issue. One of the reasons more policing doesn't work is that it's still under-informed policing. Policing that works, anywhere in the world you see it works because of the flow of information about these causes of crime and where the deviance is and what to do about it. That flow of information, our government and our system is built to ensure we cannot get it. The government comes and says to the people as they try to deal with crime, you must share your information with the police. But the government doesn't set up the country to share information with anybody, least of all with itself. The police is an arm of the executive branch of the government. And the executive branch is suffering from information with respect to education policy, with respect to health policy, with respect to creative industry policy. limited information to set up the budget, and so on and so on. You cannot govern and keep crime under control with limited information. And you cannot get adequate information in a cabinet-dominated government. It's not possible. The people will treat the cabinet as alien to themselves, and they'll say, they win, let them go ahead and do what they want. Or Rowley this, and they grumble and snipe from the sidelines. But the information that is required to tackle fundamental problems like underperformance in education, underperformance in crime, and so on, that information lies in the breasts of the citizens who lack the networking mechanisms to engage the government. You cannot network with the central government. It's impossible. You have to network in your communities and layer it all the way coming up. The communities help you to network through local government. And then local government operates as a kind of networking mechanism that drives what central government does. What we're doing in Trinidad and Tobago is we're facing the citizen with an overpowering self-government, and when people face that, they withdraw because they know they're relatively powerless against the might of the central government. And if we don't set up the system to liberate them from that, then there will be such a limited flow of information for eternity in Trinidad and Tobago that will never diversify the economy and will never solve the problem of crime. The government and the country is not organized properly to set up to solve these problems. We have to face that, and until we come around to facing that, Fareed, we just snipe and grumble every year at the government, and it doesn't matter who is in power, it will be the same problem. We have to change the structure of the government from now and then set something else in motion. Let me just give you one piece of evidence. That's what happened with young people, Cromwell and those people in Britain, when they cut off Charles I neck in 1649. That's the system they set up of the kind I'm talking about. That's the British parliamentary system today, not the kind what we thought we were copying, this nonsense that we have here, which is an executive government form. And that's the same thing that was done in the US under Jefferson and Washington and Madison. These were 30-something and 20-something year young people who made a revolution to set up a system in which they could hear each other. If you read the American Constitution, one of the most fundamental rights in there, you are a lawyer would know, is the right to petition the government. And that's why they set up all these mechanisms for hearings and so on to get citizens to bring information about what is going on, how to solve problems, what they think, what help they need, and so on. We are doing nothing to bring our citizens into a proper networking structure that allows us to inform proper policy. How are you going to make progress that way? It's impossible.
It appears that one of the reasons that gang-related activity and the gang leaders have been able to exploit through exploration is they're in tune with the community needs of the people, and they're in tune with the immediate needs, and they're in tune with the struggle of the woman without a husband, the single parent home. They're in tune with the multiple children that are living on the strength of the working mother who can't afford to tie all the ends together in order to feed her children. And the gang leaders self-police the community in as much as they make their wealth, or they generate their income through illegal activity and illicit trading and I would imagine other forms of unacceptable economic gains. The injections of capital and the injections of resources, personal and societal, that they make, they inject a certain level of comfort and healing in that community. So I could say that to say that when a police officer was shot in St. Paul Street in Borderspain, Lavenshill, and the questions were asked of the community to supply information as to who shot that officer or what information these people have. And people said, listen, these leaders, these so-called gangs, they feed the population there. They look after the population. The police are a reactive body. You call them when there's a situation, they come hours after, if they come at all. Whereas if it is we call the gang leader, he gets involved immediately. And he put certain mechanisms in place to ensure that that problem is fixed in the short term, almost immediately. So there is more results from the people who actually live in that community, meaning the leaders. So the society produced the gang leader. The gang leader wasn't exported from Costa Rica. He didn't fly in and say, well, let me set up shop in St. Paul Street. He understood the lifeblood of what is happening there, and he positioned himself to lead. And he's leading by example in the context. Listen, I came from amongst you all. I'm not trying to assume the executive power through an MP position. I understand what you're living, and I'm living the life you're living. And he's actually finding solutions on a day-to-day basis, so people could identify with that. So is it that you're saying that we don't have that skill set within the formal sector, the police sector, the police service, and perhaps other umbrella organizations within the Ministry of National Security that is tapping into that sort of information and community-based data that will inform, in fact, in its entirety or its long run, inform policy to deal with crime?
Well, I think you put your finger on the right way to look at the issue from the point of view of the gangs when you said the gang leaders live in the communities and they have their pulse on all the different issues in the communities. And what they're doing is they're turning criminal activity into resources that could finance that engagement. And it must be true if they're able to create more crime, that they are tapping into the causes of crime and putting it to their use. The ministries are nowhere near positioned in that way inside the community. They simply are operating from their offices. Your gang leaders are operating from the community and they get community information. The ministries cannot get community information. No matter how they try, they won't be trusted in that way. They're not part of any community network. So none of this that needs to be done to counteract the gang. You have to do it in the community. You have to be there where the gang leader is, and you have to offer citizens in the communities alternatives that are much more attractive and much less risky than the criminal option. That's the competition that you have to set up in the community, and you could only set that up if the community is empowered to create those attractions based on the information they have from the networking that communities really represent. Now, all communities are networks. The problem is that the networks that you have in the communities in Trinidad and in Tobago are not empowered networks, but the gang leader is empowered by guns and the money. So you are onto something when you set up the analysis that way. That's looking in the right direction, I think. And you are putting your finger on the right thing when you raise suspicions that the ministries are not placed to deal with crime at that level. They're just not there. They could only be there if the communities are empowered and network with them up the chain.
I want to make this comment. 28 women have died as a result of uh, domestic interactions with their partners, if I may put it that way. Um, and that is 28 women thus far this year, and they've died under brutal circumstances. One woman was hacked to death within recent times, and within the last week, another woman, her throat was slit, and her I believe it's a 1-year-old child, that child's throat was slit. There's been a big uproar. The PCA's director, David West, spoke about domestic violence, and he's saying that domestic violence exists within the police service also. That's a pretty damning thing, and I was wondering why would West want to mention that, even if it's happening. Now it's not a good time to talk about that. That within the police service, we have police officers who are there to enforce the law. They are the ones who are engaging in complaints are being made. In other words, he has complaints to deal with where allegations of this nature in terms of police violence towards their own spouses. It's actually starring, if we put it that way. It's a red light is going off in that area. if it is we're talking about dealing with the root causes of crime, more than the gang-related situation, we have there are certain societal norms um, that has become synonymous with Caribbean economies throughout the Caribbean, where and I think this has a history, if we were to be academic, that is dating back into slavery and indenture, where men have a position of power that they exercise over the Caribbean woman, and they've treated her as a childbearer and not as an equal, and that has resulted in a certain dominance in the household and a dominance societally um, that we haven't been able to escape as a country. Um, I can't see us eliminating domestic violence because that's like trying to eliminate crime. It's another form of crime. But what are we going to do with, and I'm inviting a comment from you, what are we going to do when it is our law enforcement personnel and the people within the commanding hikes of the central government and local government, where we see the people who we are supposed to be looking up to um, being part of the problem? Because we have a prime minister who a common comment he makes is he doesn't want to have dialogue with people who are part of the problem. Of course, he's throwing that for the opposition. He's throwing that corn in the direction of the opposition in terms of they're not supporting him in terms of legislation that needs to be passed. But that sort of analogy is applicable in other ways too. We have institutional flaws in the society. Through public education, I guess we have to ensure that people understand that there's a greater responsibility to family, and there's a greater responsibility to solve your domestic problems in a way that doesn't impact upon your children within the house, and where you're imparting values and teaching them that this is another method of solving a problem. When you strong arm the mother and you beat the children and you strong arm everybody within your circle, and you rule the house, your household with an iron fist. What is your comment on that? Because we're talking dealing with the root causes of crime.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you're heading in the right direction there too. But the main idea that I think we have to work with here is that to the extent that you're dealing with a problem of domestic violence, you have to see the way the family is organized. And before these criminal acts take place, these problems are seething in the families for years and years with no outlet, no mechanisms available to them in the form of high quality social work, addressing the empowerment of the woman in the home, providing opportunities for the females to network in the community outside the home and stuff like that. There's a whole pernicious structure that we have put in place that allows these problems to seethe and ultimately break out into the form of domestic violence. No counseling options available where they live, right? And they don't have the money to go somewhere and spend on high-powered consultants to help them address problems amongst themselves within the families. Well, in the foundations that I am closely associated with in Jamaica, there's a lot of surrogate parenting mechanisms, support for the home to deal with the situation of the woman, and so on. And then tie that to the point I'm making, that the community is the best natural place for you to put these provisions in place, empowered communities. So they have the option and they have the network, they have the financing mechanism, and so on. So instead of wasting money on X or Y or Z, strengthen your communities and allow them to put these responses to family challenges in place. That's part of your development initiative as well. And the other thing I want to mention is, if people cannot practice networking, practice democracy, as it were, in the community at large, where are they going to learn? Coming out of slavery and strict indenture that you referenced, where you learn only authoritarianism in the home, in the church, in the government, everything around you is authoritarian, is bully and drive and dominate. Collaboration and cooperation is viewed, and compromise is viewed as weakness. And the man thinks he has to be the boss and so on. When you face a civilization set up that way, the only way forward is to provide a range of networking opportunities people can deploy by liberating them to set up their own networks, and provide opportunities through the community structure through which people can practice democracy, practice to negotiate and concede here and get something there, and learn to differ without being violent to one another. And all of those things you have to learn over a long period of practice that in the end will temper a lot of this domestic violence thing you're talking about. My point to you in overall is we're not locked into where we are by where we have to keep going with what we're doing. That obviously is failing. Every Monday morning you have to talk about a different kind of problem. We can intervene in the society. We didn't inherit it from heaven. It's not written in the sky that we have to operate in this anachronistic and archaic way. We can intervene and set up our systems where people can practice the network, which is the essence of the thing. And women will be able to build powerful networks and help one another. Men and women will be able to network differently through the community arrangements and so on. They'll learn they'll see in practice, not what they see in your parliament, which is the bullying of the opposition by your dominant executive and so on. They will not see that. They'll see something else in their communities where they're learning, just like you learn a language, you learn the art and the skills of compromise. My point is the way we are set up now is a prescription for failure. And if we want to make any progress, we have to change this setup. So every day we're learning to innovate, to work with one another, to network, to make progress, to help each other make progress, and so on. What we're doing now is a prescription for failure for 1,000 years. What we have to do is change the system, empower people in the local communities, and allow them to bring the solutions they know. Every one of those battered women would want to tell their friends and so on, but they know if they go and they talk, they get themselves into trouble because nothing will happen in and around them. If you had an empowered community, something would happen. And that's the thing that you have to think about. The people in Tobago told me this. They told me in the communities of Tobago, you have to set up the government in a way that creates 3 layers of success in the country. One layer is the community. That's what Tobagonians tell me. One layer is the private sector, and one layer is the central and local government. And you know what? They are so right, because the things you could do in a community, if you don't set them up to do it, you're missing that completely from the picture. The foundations on which a society makes progress is the community and the community development program in the communities. And it's there that people will see the deviance. It's there that they will see the abuse in the home and take steps to do that. They will see the undereducation program there and they'll take steps. That is where we have to go as a country if we want to make any progress. We're not going to go anywhere if we don't tackle that problem.
We have 3 minutes again. I want you to close the program in terms of your comment on the fact that the way central government is set up, and we vote on every 5 years in order to have a representative for our community represent our interests in the parliament. That system may or may not be working as effectively as it should, because if it is, we have societies that are non-functioning. It's producing criminals. It's not developing the community-based economy isn't developing at the pace and the rate it should. It means to say that our MPs are failing in some way, and if they're not failing, they're part of the problem. What is your comment on that in terms of, do you see the existing structure as it exists? breathing the development drives that we so desire in order to achieve Vision 2030?
No, it's a barrier. It's a big barrier. It's the biggest single barrier to development, and the most important investment program we have to put in place is the constitutional reform. The current system is a barrier to everything: crime solutions, development, everything. The current system of government, and it's not that your MPs can't do better. It's that you've designed a parliament in which the MPs go to parliament to long eye the cabinet. Everybody wants to get into the cabinet, whether you're in the opposition or not, because the only center of power in the parliament is the cabinet. What you have to do is set up the government so that the cabinet is a small center of power. The rest of the government is empowered to go to parliament to make law and control the cabinet. And that means the vast majority of our MPs must be outside the cabinet. You get 15, 16 of them in there. You have a parliament of a lower house of 100. So you have enough people outside the cabinet on the winning side who goes there to make law, to monitor what's happening in our country and make law to ring fence the behavior of the cabinet. That's the half of the story. And another part of what we're wasting our time with is this appointed Senate that violates the fundamental tenets of democracy. You have the people who are involved in making law in any serious country must all be elected. You can't have appointed set of people that are accountable to citizens and so on, and you're allowing them to make law to govern us. You got to throw that out and put an elected Senate in place. The whole Senate has to be elected, not what Terry Farrell and them proposing with some elected and some not. The whole Senate has to be elected, and it has to be big enough to allow our people to go there, run oversight committees to control the behavior of the cabinet. Now, they ring fence it, they make the law, and when the cabinet mistakes and misbehaves and demonstrates incompetence, that system would allow you to remove the prime minister the way the British removed the Truss. They'll remove the prime minister and put somebody competent in his place from inside the winning party, if necessary, or force an election. The system we are running now is a prescription for failure because it is cabinet government. It is executive government. It's not democratic government. We need to put a democratic system of government in place in which the majority of our parliamentarians go to parliament to make law, not to be in the cabinet. A tiny minority goes to parliament to be in the cabinet to implement the law made for them. They could pitch in a point here, pitch in a point there, but the majority of the dominant influence making law are the non-executive members of the parliament. If we don't go to a design like that, Senate and House, and if you give that some thought, I hope one of the days we could go through the details of that with the arithmetic and all of that. But if you give that some thought, you would see that what it would provide for you is an environment in which there is concern for what the citizen is, because you've got to learn, if you're going to make law, you have to go and talk to your people to find out what you're representing. Representative democracy means that, and so on. So in my study of government and politics for development, that's the way I have to think about it. And Trinidad and Tobago fails miserably on the business of the structure of government that could facilitate diversification, development, crime management, and all of that. It is time for us to wake up and change. We called for that as young people in 1970. This is 52, 50, 54 years. Why are we going on with this nonsense?
Dr. James, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. We are now 6:03. So before my network start pounding me on the back of the head. Thank you again. We will invite you again, and you'll have a lot more time.
It's always a pleasure having you on,
Yes.
bringing about that kind of education. And I hope that Farid will bring you back on that particular topic about electing senates and stuff.
Yeah, next time.
Yes. Okay.
Thank
you
you so much. Enjoy the evening.
Yes. Enjoy the rest of the evening.
Take care. Blessings to the public. David, over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. That's it for today's edition of Hard Talk with Farid Ali. We've had our special guest, Professor Dr. Vanus James, right here at Power 102 Digital. Hard Talk, Power 102 Digital Wednesday. Farid will be back next Wednesday for another edition of Hard Talk.